I never thought I'd be grateful for my mother's insistence on prenuptial agreements, but here we are, I said as I looked at our new house's immaculate white walls. My parents, Julie and David, gave me a lovely home in the scenic Upper New York region as a wedding present. Our happily ever after was supposed to start then, but circumstances had other ideas. Owen, my spouse, was occupied with unloading boxes in the living room, stooping over to go through our possessions. His voice muffled by the cardboard, he yelled out, "Stephanie, honey, can you give me a hand with this?" I let out a sigh and moved away from the window. I forced a grin and said, "Coming," joining him. I felt suspicious and couldn't get rid of it even while I assisted Owen with packing. Since our arrival, he had been remarkably silent, the normal charm and laid-back demeanor replaced with a tense intensity. "Is everything okay?" I put a hand on his arm and asked. Owen held the box for a moment before putting it down. "There's actually something we need to talk about," he remarked, concern clouding his blue eyes. My stomach fell out. "What is it?" The doorbell rang before Owen had a chance to respond. As if the bell had saved him, he appeared to relax. He hurried to the door and exclaimed, "That must be Mom." I became motionless. Sarah, his mother, was not scheduled to see him until the next week. Owen led the way to the doorway, where he was already standing with a little graying woman. "Sarah," I forced a grin and replied, "What a surprise." With tears in her eyes, Sarah turned away from Owen and faced me. She murmured, "Oh, Stephanie." Her voice faltered. "I'm so sorry to barge in like this, but I couldn't wait any longer." Owen touched his mother on the shoulder. He led her into the living room and said, "Mom, why don't we sit down?" I was starting to feel a little anxious as we sat down on the couch and looked about at all the partially opened boxes. With her knuckles white, Sarah tightly gripped Owen's hand. I looked between them and said, "What's going on?" Sarah inhaled deeply. Her words, "I've been diagnosed with terminal cancer," hung thick in the air. "The doctors say I have barely a year." I gasped in disbelief. "Oh, Sarah, I'm so sorry," I replied, putting my hand up to her arm. She smiled weakly at me. "I'm grateful, sweetie. However, that's not all." She looked at Owen, who gave her a supportive nod. "I can't live by myself anymore, and I was hoping, well, we were hoping." Owen cleared his throat. He stated, "Mom's going to settle in with us, Stephanie," in a tone that did not allow for debate. I had a gut punch sensation. All of a sudden, our new beginning, our house, was being invaded. However, how could I protest? Heaven forbid, the woman was dying. "Of course," I said to myself, sounding distant. "We have plenty of room." Sarah grinned broadly. Pulling us into a group hug, she exclaimed, "Oh, thank you both so much." I saw Owen's eye over his mother's shoulder as we embraced. He gave me a quiet thank you, but I was too shy to return the grin. Our life together was not meant to start this way. Later that night, my mind racing, I glanced at the ceiling while Owen slept soundly beside me. How had this been our ideal new beginning? Although I was in love with Owen, I couldn't get rid of the notion that I was losing my own identity. I had no idea that this was only the start of a chain of incidents that would try my tolerance, love, and, in the end, my ability to exact retribution. I struggled to concentrate on my laptop screen, while the smell of freshly made coffee permeated the kitchen. After Sarah moved in 3 weeks ago, I still felt alienated in my own house. I would discover her reorganizing my meticulously arranged cabinets or abruptly altering our routines every morning. Sarah's voice called out to me from behind. "Stephanie, dear, I hope you don't mind, but I've requested the ladies from my support group over for tea this afternoon." I forced a grin as I tightened my grasp on my coffee mug. "Actually, Sarah, I have an important phone conference scheduled for—" "Oh, don't worry," she said, giving me a shoulder pat. We'll be as silent as mice at church. We won't even be noticeable to you." It was already midday when Owen, defying my objections, went into the kitchen while still wearing his pajamas. He yawned and kissed his mother's cheek before giving me a short peck. "Morning, ladies," he said. "Owen, may I speak with you for a moment in private?" I said, attempting to maintain a level voice. He trailed me into our bedroom and peered. "What's wrong?" I inhaled deeply. "Owen, we must establish some limits with your mom. She is assuming control of the house, making changes without my permission, and now she is having guests over while I'm at work." Owen's expression dimmed. "Steph, come on. She's going through a hard moment. Could you just give her a break?" I yelled. "I've been giving her a pass for weeks, but this is our home and I need some say in what goes on here." "It's her home now, too," Owen said, sounding more serious. "She is dying, in case you had forgotten. We should at least try to make her comfortable." I became quite angry. "What about my level of comfort? My effort? Does that no longer matter?" Owen narrowed his gaze. "It's unbelievable how self-centered you are at this moment. You just seem concerned about yourself, but my mother needs us." I felt his words smack me. Self-centered? I've gone above and beyond to make her feel comfortable, but there must be a limit. Owen snapped back. "Well, maybe you need to be more flexible. Stephanie, family comes first. I assumed you were aware of it." As I looked at him, I sensed a gap growing between us. "Owen, I believed that we were a family, me and you." He gave a regretful shake of his head. "We are, but my mother is now included in it as well. I want you to acknowledge that." With that, he turned on his heels and left the room. For the first time in our marriage, Owen had picked someone else above me, and I stood there, shocked at the thought. The remainder of the day seemed to fly by. Although Sarah's pals remained silent as promised, their presence seemed like an encroachment. I found it difficult to focus on my call because I could hear the occasional chuckle and whispered discussions coming from downstairs. I heard Owen and Sarah chatting in the living room that evening while I was cleaning up the kitchen. Sarah whispered to Owen, "I'm worried about her. She always seems so uptight. Perhaps things aren't working out this way." "No, Mom," Owen firmly said. "This is now your house. Stephanie will get used to it. All she needs is time." With trembling hands, I put down the dish I was holding. Adapt? Was that all I was supposed to do? To quietly accept my life's whole upheaval? I saw my reflection in the window as I stood there struggling with a mixture of hurt and rage. The woman who was looking at me appeared worn out and dejected. I knew myself to be a strong, independent Stephanie, but this wasn't her. Something inside of me changed at that very instant. It dawned on me that I may completely lose myself if I didn't start advocating for myself now. But how could I respond in kind without appearing to be the antagonist of this family drama? I had no idea that things were about to get much more convoluted, driving me closer to the brink and preparing us for a showdown that would completely alter our course. My phone started buzzing constantly when I was in the middle of a very important business presentation. Disregarding it, I persevered, and at completion discovered 5 unanswered calls from Owen. I called him back, my heart pounding, thinking the worst about Sarah's condition. "Steph, great news!" Owen's voice resounded loudly from the speaker. "Jack's coming home." Perplexed, I blinked. "Jack, your sibling? Are you saying that you're going home?" Excitedly, Owen stated, "He's leaving his job in California and moving back east. While he gets back on his feet, he will remain with us. Isn't it amazing?" The space whirled. One more individual in our already packed home? "Owen, wait a minute, we can't just—" "Oh, I must leave. Mom is calling, I love you." Just before I could object, he hung up. I sat there in disbelief. How could Owen decide something so important without even asking me? For his whole family, our residence wasn't a midway house. That night, when Sarah was in the living room watching her favorite game show, I went up to Owen in the kitchen. I remarked in a quiet voice, "We need to talk about Jack." Owen lifted his gaze from slicing veggies. "How about him? Isn't it wonderful that he's returning?" I inhaled deeply. "Owen, you can't just invite people to live in our home without discussing it with me first." With a grimace, he put down the knife. "Stephanie, they are my family. He requires our assistance." "And what about what I need?" I retaliated. "This is my home too, and I feel like I'm losing all control over it." Owen's face became stern. "Again, you're acting egotistical. Jack's mother needs all the family support she can receive at this difficult time." "Don't you dare call me selfish," I growled. "I've gone above and above to make your mother feel comfortable, but this is too much. Owen, we're meant to be partners. You cannot continue to act alone when making these judgments." "I'm not." He was adamant. "I'm acting in our best interest for our family." "Our family?" I gave a sour laugh. "It seems like the idea of our family doesn't include me anymore." It was Sarah from the living room who said, "Is everything all right in there, dear?" "Everything's fine, Mom," Owen yelled back, then turned to face me, begging, "Can we discuss this at a later time?" I wished not to annoy her. Frustrated, I threw up my hands and marched out of the kitchen. Sarah drew my attention as I walked by the living room, her look a mixture of worry and something more. Was that a victory? Owen worked feverishly over the following 2 days to be ready for Jack's arrival. I tried to ignore the animosity building inside of me and poured myself into my job. I was lying in bed the night before Jack was supposed to come, gazing up at the ceiling. Owen said, "Steph," his voice low in the shadows, "are you still upset about Jack?" I looked up at him. "Owen, it's not just about Jack. It concerns us. I think your family is losing you to me." He extended his hand and drew me in. "I'm not leaving you. As my wife, you have my undying love. But at this moment, my family needs me. Is it not clear to you?" I was curious to know. I did, truly. However, I couldn't get rid of the idea that our marriage was failing, one family problem at a time, while I lay there in Owen's arms. I braced myself when I heard a vehicle pull up outside the following morning. Jack's loud shouting filled the home when the front door burst open a few moments later. He said, chuckling at his own joke, "Honey, I'm home." I put on a grin and proceeded to say hello, but I halted in the hallway. Jack wasn't by himself. A young woman with her arm around his was standing behind him. Jack said, "Hey sis," not realizing how shocked I was. "This is my fiancée, Veronica. I hope this is okay, but she will also be staying with us. We are going to get married." I felt like an alien in my own house as Owen and Sarah hurried to congratulate the happy couple while I remained still. I was the only one who seemed to notice that this was a full-scale conquest rather than simply an invasion. Empty beer bottles and half-eaten bags of chips littered the formerly immaculate kitchen countertops. I winced as I made my way through the chaos, the sharp stench of burned-out cigarettes hitting my nose. This was now a frat house. It was no longer my home. I yelled, "Jack," since I was becoming impatient. "How many times do I have to ask you to clean up after yourself?" From the living room came a muffled moan. When I rushed in, Veronica was cuddled up next to Jack, who was stretched out on the couch. There were additional bottles all over the coffee table, and the ashtray was full to bursting. Jack murmured, "Sorry, sis," without even trying to open his eyes. "We'll get to it later." I clenched my hands, resisting the need to let out a cry. "No, you will now attend to it. This property is a pigsty, and in an hour I have clients coming over." Veronica sprang awake and sent me a scowl through hazy eyes. "You relax, Stephanie. It's not as if it matters much." Sarah stood at the doorway, her worried expression engraved on her face, before I could reply. "What's all the commotion about?" Angry, I turned to face her. "Look at this mess, Sarah. It's not appropriate." Her hand was waved dismissively. "Well, they are youthful. Permit them to enjoy themselves. I'll clean up afterward." "That's not the point," I angrily said. "This is my home, and I expect it to be respected." Sarah's gaze grew strained. "Our house, sweetheart. Recall that everyone here is family." The term family struck me like a verbal jab in the face. I was about to continue my argument when the smoke started to smell much worse. I turned and saw flames licking up the drapes at the spot where Jack had thrown a cigarette butt carelessly. "Fire!" I let out a cry and quickly reached for the fire extinguisher. Everyone rushed to take action, causing chaos to explode. The flames burned a big hole in the pricey curtains my mother had given us, but I was able to put them out. Shaking with astonishment and indignation, I remained there until the smoke cleared. Hearing the noise from above, Owen stormed into the room. With a frantic glance around, he asked, "What happened?" "Your brother," I said, "almost burned down our house because he can't be bothered to use an ashtray." Jack was even decent enough to display embarrassment. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "Save it," I interrupted him. "Veronica and you should leave. Right now." Owen moved in between us. "Steph, please relax. It was an accident," according to Owen. My ears were unbelievable to me. "Owen, please. Can't you see how terrible this situation is?" "Of course I do," he answered in a tone that was incredibly composed. "However, evicting them isn't the solution. Since we are family, we must remain united." I saw their expressions. Veronica's rebellious, Jack's bashful, Sarah's disapproving, and Owen's imploring. I've never felt more alone than I did at that moment. "All right," I said icily. "If that's how you all feel, I'll be the one to leave." I threw some clothing in a suitcase and stormed upstairs. I zipped it up, and there stood Owen in the doorway. "Steph, please don't do this," he implored. "Where will you go?" I stepped over him with grace. "Anywhere but here." "Stephanie, dear, you're overreacting," Sarah said as I got to the front door. "Why don't we all have a seat and discuss this together?" For the last time, I turned to face them. "There's nothing to discuss. Owen, you've made it plain what matters to you, and it's not our marriage or me." I stepped out and shut the door after leaving. I realized I had no idea where I was heading as soon as I got into my car and grasped the steering wheel with trembling palms. I was confident, though, that I couldn't stay in that place for one more minute. My eyes became blurry with tears as I drove away. A mixture of betrayal, fury, and a deep sense of loss washed over me. My marriage and the life I thought I had were collapsing all around me. And for the first time, I permitted myself to entertain a possibility that I had been ruling out for weeks. Perhaps there was nothing left to save this marriage. After 3 days in a motel, I came home with my resolve strengthened and my fury simmering. Upon entering through the front entrance, I was met with an unsettling quiet. Not a mess in sight, not a chattering TV. There was a problem. Owen came out of the kitchen wearing a fake smile. "Stephanie, we need to talk." I braced myself. "Indeed we do. It can't continue like this, Owen. Something has to change." With a nod, he indicated the living room. I saw Sarah looking at something behind a half-closed door as we sat down. My teeth tightened. "I've been thinking," Owen said unusually calmly. "Maybe it's best if we take some time alone." The words struck me like a punch to the body. "What?" He couldn't look me in the eye. "It's just the stress and the incessant fighting. Nobody should do it, especially Mom given her condition." I thought I was going to drown. "So you want to separate because I'm making your mother displeased?" "It's not just that. he quickly clarified. Your attitude, the constant nagging, it's creating a toxic environment for everyone. I gave a sour laugh. My nagging, Owen? Have you recently had a look around? Your family has taken over our lives and house. See, this is the very thing I'm talking about, he said. You keep saying your family like they're not your family too. Because they're not behaving like it, I snapped. They've shown zero respect for me or this home. You've done nothing but encourage them. Owen froze in place. They're going through a challenging moment. I had assumed you would have more empathy. Understanding? I was immediately standing up, trembling with rage. I have just shown understanding. I've had your brother almost setting my house on fire, your mother rearrangement of my belongings, and you... My voice cracking, I hesitated. You've consistently chosen them over me, your wife. Owen mumbled, "That's not fair," in protest. No, it's unfair that you're deceiving me with this separation crap rather than working on it. With a creaky open door, Sarah emerged with a worried expression on her face. I'm so sorry, my love. I didn't plan to incite this much conflict. I turned to face her. Oh, Sarah, preserve it. Isn't this precisely what you were hoping for, to foment animosity amongst us? Owen leaped to his feet and spoke louder. Enough now. You have no right to blame my mother. Your family, your brother, your mother, I spit out. For months, that's all I've heard. Owen, what about me? How about us? With a look of exasperation on his face, he ran a hand through his hair. Stephanie, I'm not sure what you want from me. My goal is to make everyone happy. I completed it for him, except me. Well, congrats. Everyone is thrilled now that you've succeeded, except for your wife. Sarah moved in closer and put her hand on my arm. Maybe if you tried to be a little more accommodating, Stephanie, dear. I shook myself free of her. Avoid touching me, and please refrain from telling me how to conduct myself in my own house. Anger surged in Owen's eyes. That's all there is to it. This is getting too much for me. Stephanie, I believe you ought to go. Give yourself some space to calm down and consider your top priorities. I looked at him, hurt and incredulity at odds inside of me. What are my top priorities? Owen, how about yours? When did I become less important to you? He merely averted his gaze without reply. That's when I realized our marriage was a farce, a ruse to allow Owen to be the faithful brother and son, while I kind of vanished into the background. All right, I answered in a chilly tone. I'm going to leave. However, don't expect me to slink back and beg for your pardon. You've gone too far this time. I heard Sarah comforting Owen and telling him he had made the right decision as I hurried upstairs to get my belongings. As I went around our bedroom, gathering necessities, their voices gradually disappeared. My fingers lingered on a framed picture of Owen and me on our wedding anniversary. I slammed it face down with a swift, decisive gesture. Strangers now occupied the same spot as the joyful couple had vanished. I understood that this was no longer only about keeping my marriage together as I walked out, luggage in hand. It was a self-preservation issue. In Kelly's living room, I sat with a glass of wine clutched like a lifeline. As I finished my account of the previous several months with Owen's heartbreaking suggestion of splitting up, my voice broke. Anger surged in Kelly's eyes. That cowardly weasel. In what way might he put his family before you? I groaned, realizing how tired I was. Kelly, I'm not sure what to do. I feel as though everything has been gone. With a determined gaze, she leaned forward. No, Stephanie, not all is lost. You simply lost unnecessary weight. Time to take back your life, please. Her words sparked something within me. However, how? My life and my house have been taken over by Owen and his family. A knowing smile crept over Kelly's lips. Steph, keep in mind who owns that house. It was given to you by your parents, not Owen. My eyes grew wide as I realized this. You're accurate. My name is on the deed. That's right, Kelly confirmed. You should speak with your parents and a lawyer right now. You must safeguard your possessions and yourself. I met with my parents, Julie and David, the next day. Their expressions, after I described everything, were a mixture of worry and rage. Mom hugged me and whispered, "Oh, sweetheart. We were unaware that things had gotten that bad," Dad said in a stern tone. "Stephanie, that boy never deserved you or our kindness." I inhaled deeply. "I require your assistance. I'm not sure how, but I want to fight back." Dad and Mom looked at each other. Dad reached for his phone and remarked, "We have just the person. Do you recall Louis, your cousin? He is currently a divorce lawyer." I was telling my tale at Louis's office in a matter of hours. He listened with a frown on his face. After I was done, he remarked, "Stephanie, from what you've told me, you have a solid case. The residence is your individual property and not a marital asset. It is not Owen's to claim." My chest filled with hope. "So what should we do?" Louis grinned resolutely. "We launch an attack. I'll promptly file for divorce and make it plain that Owen and his family must leave your property." My phone buzzed as I was leaving Louis's office, a strategy beginning to take shape. It was Owen. "Please come home, Stephanie. We must have a conversation." I braced myself. "In an hour. I'll be there." As soon as I stepped into our home, my home, I felt a wave of confidence. In the living room, Owen was waiting, looking pale. "I'm so sorry, Steph," he started. "I've been reflecting and I see my error. Could we please resolve this?" I nearly chuckled. "Owen, work what out? That you prioritized your family above me? That you allowed them to treat me badly in my own house?" He winced. "I acknowledge my mistake, but—" I interrupted him. "Buts are not present. It's too late to offer regrets." Owen's expression dimmed. "What are you saying?" I inhaled deeply, letting all of my hurt and rage out. "Owen, I'm saying it's over. My desire is for a divorce." He lost all of his facial color. "Divorce? Please, Stephanie, let's not rush things." "Hasty?" I sneered. "I've put up with you and your family walking all over me for months. Not any longer." Sarah materialized in the doorway, a worried mask covering her features. "What's happening?" I turned to face her, sounding icy. "You, Jack, and Victoria are going to have to begin packing. I want you all to leave my house." I had a mixture of triumph and sadness as I left the workplace. I'd prevailed, but at what price? The truth of my circumstances dawned on me that evening as I sat by myself in my peaceful home. I was alone myself, yet I was free. The home seemed chilly and empty, where there had once been laughter and love. My phone beeped, alerting me to Kelly's text. "How did things turn out? Do you want me to visit you?" Tears started to form as I gazed at the words. No more Owen, no more in-laws, no more chaos. This was my new normal. This big, empty house. Just me. In typing my response, I realized that this was not only the end of my marriage, but also the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one that I would write according to my own rules. I replied via text, "Come over, it's time to mark my freedom." Taking a big breath, I gazed about my now truly mine abode. The fight to reconstruct my life had only just begun, even if the battle had been won. I felt prepared to take on whatever was ahead for the first time in months. In sharp contrast to the whirlwind of feelings within me, the day Owen and his family were scheduled to move out dawned bright and clear. As I watched from the window, a moving truck approached the curb. Owen came out of the house with a package. We locked contact for a moment, and I noticed a glint of regret in his eyes before he averted his sight. Sarah trailed after, firmly resting on Jack's arm. She glanced at my window, her expression unclear. Watching them load the truck brought up a lot of memories for me, including our housewarming celebration, our first dinner together, and our many leisurely Sundays spent together. For a little while, doubt surfaced. Was I doing something wrong? The sound of the doorbell startled me out of my trance. Kelly was standing there with a bottle of champagne and a determined expression when I opened it. "I assumed you might benefit from some ethical assistance," she remarked as she entered. With gratitude, I grinned. "You're clueless." Through the window, we saw the shifting procedure while we sat in the kitchen. Kelly poured champagne into each of our glasses. As we shook glasses, she raised a toast to new beginnings. Owen materialized at the entryway. "Stephanie, may we have a brief conversation?" Kelly gave me a firm handshake and slipped out of the room. Arming myself, I turned to confront Owen. "What's that?" I asked, attempting to maintain a steady tone. Gazing lost, he ran a hand through his hair. "I simply wanted to apologize for everything. I never intended for things to turn out this way." A lump formed in my throat. "Owen, neither did I, but we are unable to go back." He gave a nod, his eyes shining. "I am aware. All I want is for you to forgive me one day." He turned to go, and I yelled, "Owen!" He stopped and turned around. I whispered, "I hope you find happiness." He smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Likewise, Steph. You are deserving of it." Then he vanished. Through the window, I witnessed the moving truck departing, carrying the remains of my previous existence. When Kelly came back, she put her arm around my shoulders. "How are you feeling?" I inhaled deeply. "To be honest, I have no idea. Everything from sad to afraid to relieved." She gave a sympathetic nod. "That is typical. However, what's the deal? You are now at liberty. You have the opportunity to rediscover who you are." I had a surge of joy as her words clicked. She was accurate. I was really free to live my life how I wanted for the first time in a long time. We redesigned the house for the next several hours, moving furniture, choosing paint colors, and organizing the transformation of the guest room into a home office. We sat on the terrace, taking in the quiet as nightfall approached. When Kelly's phone rang, she smiled and opened the message. Then, with a playful twinkle in her eye, she asked, "Do you remember my colleague Leo, the one I told you about?" Curious, I nodded. "Yes, he has, nevertheless, been inquiring about you. Would you be interested in getting coffee sometime?" That was his question. An exhilaration and worry flutter in my stomach. "Kelly, I'm not sure. Is this not a bit premature?" She gave a headshake. "Nat, it's just coffee, not a tight squeeze. However, it might be comforting to keep in mind that there are decent men out there, men who will prioritize you." After giving it some thinking, I grinned. "What do you know? Say, 'I would love to him." I looked out over the garden while Kelly typed her response, and I felt a wave of calm come over me. I felt hopeful for the first time in months, even though the road ahead remained unclear. This mansion, which had previously stood for my disintegrating marriage, now symbolized a fresh start. It was mine, really mine, to fill with new experiences, new connections, and maybe even new love in the future. With a quiet toast, I lifted my glass to mark the close of one chapter and the thrilling beginning of another. I was prepared to confront the future head-on, stronger and more knowledgeable than before, whatever it brought. On this turbulent day, as the sun descended, I realized that sometimes the end of one dream only signifies the start of a better one. I was eager to see what this new dream held for me.